And now I'd like to welcome our expert panel for this evening, Chuck Freilich, former Deputy National Security Advisor, and Yosef Kupperwasser, former head of the Research Division in the IDF's Military Intelligence. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today. Yossi, I'll start with you. We're speaking of a new hostage deal. What are the chances for and the chances against? How do you evaluate them this evening?
Well, I think the chances are a little bit better than they were a couple of days before, but still questionable. The two sides have their own red lines, and they still believe that they can get what they really think is necessary for them in order to deliver the deal for their own constituencies. So it's not easy for any of them to work a deal that is not considered to be such as they promised their people. And from an Israeli point of view, I think that Israel cannot afford putting an end to the war. This ceasefire, long ceasefire that is promised is going to last 2 months or something like that, to the point that people would lose confidence that the war is going to be continued after the ceasefire, then the Israeli government is not going to be able to accept it. And again, was this question of the number of terrorists that are going to be released from jail. So it's not an easy task for the Israeli government, and it's not an easy task for Hamas, because Hamas wants to make sure that it stays in power, and Israel cannot afford an arrangement that would guarantee Hamas to stay in power in Gaza. It's a tricky situation.
Yes. Chuck Freilich, pro and cons for the deal?
Excuse me, what for the deal?
Pro and cons.
Oh. Look, obviously we want to do pretty much whatever we can to bring the hostages home. And I think most of us are willing to pay a very heavy price for that. But like Yossi, I believe that we cannot agree to end the war at this stage because we haven't yet completed fully achieved our objectives. And we cannot leave Hamas in power, and we cannot withdraw the IDF from Gaza. In essence, this wouldn't just be a hostage deal. This would be handing Hamas a strategic victory at the end of the war. It's bad enough that it started off with the kind of Hamas victory that they had at the time. This has to end with a very, very different impression.
Jonathan, you want to say something about
Yes, we're speaking of the possible pause in the war, which is very difficult for Israel to swallow. That is true. I think another issue, and it's something that Yossi also brought up, the issue of the prisoners that Israel will have to release, not only the numbers, but also the identities. Because if there's a big difference, we're speaking of numbers that are staggering, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, so a huge amount. But there is, of course, a difference if you release minors, women, older people, criminals and so on, or if you release what we call here heavy terrorists with a lot of Israeli blood on their hands. And this is something that for many Israelis will be difficult to see. People that are in jail because they're responsible for the death of 100 Israelis. There are such terrorists for killing entire families. Should they be released or not? I really, really don't envy anyone who has to take such a decision, because releasing those people from jail is terrible, but leaving the hostages in Gaza is also terrible.
So let's touch this point. Yosef Kupperwasser, you've been in the business for many, many years. Israel has released 1,027, if my memory does not mistaken me, prisoners, including Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, for one Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, 12 years ago in 2011. The hostages won't be brought back without releasing prisoners. But on the other side, releasing prisoners and getting duplicates of Yahya Sinwar, what do we achieve in that? So how do you decide?
Well, the thing that we were trying to accomplish since the beginning of this war is to put much more pressure on Hamas so that the price for they would charge us for releasing the prisoners, the hostages, would be much less on releasing prisoners who are terrorists, but much more in securing their lives and making it possible for them to live and survive, to leave Gaza and survive somewhere else. That is the idea. And I don't think that we should go for a deal that is not based on this principle, because otherwise the price is unacceptable. And look, I was at the time the head of the Director General of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, and I was against the deal. And I think that I'm talking about the Shalit deal. And I think that to pay now this price is, as Chuck also said, it's handing Hamas an unbelievable victory that would be the basis for many more attempts to kidnap Israelis and to charge us with heavy prices like the 7th of October. This makes no sense.
Chuck, we've spoken, I believe it was about a month and a half ago in the middle of December, and we evaluated that Israel has, until after the holidays, which means until the 10th of January, that has long passed. Israel is still in Gaza. Let's look at to the future, how much time Israel has, what Israel needs to achieve during that time. We're into an election year in Washington. President Biden is suffering tough time from the Republicans, but from within his party as well. What should Israel look for?
Well, I think our time is running out. The political time. President Biden has been a truly remarkable friend to Israel. I do not think that we could have possibly hoped for a better American president. He's in a position now where domestic pressure, it's mostly on the progressive Democratic left, but the pressure is reaching a level where it might even cost him the elections. Now, people have been saying that already for a couple of months, and I think some people leap to that conclusion too easily, but it's getting there now. It is going to be a very close election, and there are certain areas, for example, in Michigan, which has a large Muslim population, where it could cost him the election. I mean, in the end, it's going to come down to a very small number of votes. And the same thing in other constituencies, especially places with a large population of people of color. I think that we have a strategic interest in seeing Mr. Biden reelected. I think that is a foremost Israeli interest, and we're going to have to take that into account in how we handle things. And really, what we're trying to do is help him to help us. The question then is also, what do we achieve in Gaza? Well, I think we're nearing the end of the battle in Khan Yunis. I don't think we can afford to stop before that. And I would really like to do a Fiach also before we stop. And of course, there's a need for clear up operations in the north. There's then the entire diplomatic issue. What's going to happen in the day after? The American attempt to, well, despite Israeli opposition or the opposition of this government, to see if they can start cobbling together an Arab coalition that will, at least at a later stage, be able to set the basis for taking over in Gaza, and still trying to preserve the option of Saudi normalization. I think we'll be facing that in the coming months as well. And just the last sentence, I think it's quite remarkable how we've all almost forgotten that there's an Iranian nuclear program to still worry about.
Yossi, you want to use the minute that we've got left to tackle this issue of, the American support and the length of the rope that Israel still has?
Well, I think we have enough time to move towards victory in Gaza. Because the Americans also understand that if Israel doesn't win this war in a way that is clear that it has won it, it's going to be on the expense of the United States as well. It's going to force the United States to get involved in a war in the Middle East that they are trying to avoid. And you cannot run away from the Iranians and their proxies when you are losing the war. So I think that the Americans have an interest in making sure that Israel will win the war. And that's why we have the support of Biden. He's a friend, but he's also somebody who's concerned about the interests of the United States. He's worried that the security of the United States and the interests of the United States are going to be hurt if Israel doesn't win the war. That's why I think we have an ongoing cooperation with them.
Jonathan?
Yes, there are political implications. As much as Israel Israel has said to itself over the years, we're fighting by ourselves, with ourselves. We don't need foreign assistance. Yes, Israel cannot fight this war alone. Israel needs the United States. If the United States is very strong onto something, then yes, Israel will have to consider that. Even this government, even Benjamin Netanyahu, who takes all the considerations of his coalition members from the far right. If the United States is going to put a red line, Israel will have to adhere to that. There's no other choice. Yes, there are elections in the U.S. and it's important. And as was said here, I think that the intense battle in the Gaza Strip, in Khan Yunis, and later on in Rafah also will eventually end. Rafah, of course, a sensitive story with the Egyptians. How do you do the Philadelphia corridor? But I think we're closing in we're coming to a stage where the intense fight is over, and then we'll see some different kind of operations.
Jonathan Regev here in the studio. Thank you so much. Chuck Freilich, Yosef Kupperwasser, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us.